Kim Do-hyun had never seen anything so beautiful and so terrifying at the same time. The Concordat station floated in the darkness of space like a city made of light. It was bigger than anything humans had ever built. Towers of crystal and metal stretched in every direction. Ships moved around it like insects around a hive. Millions of aliens lived inside those walls. And now, for the first time in history, humans were about to walk among them. The shuttle carrying the Earth delegation moved slowly toward the docking port. Do-hyun sat near the window, his heart beating fast. He was not an important man. He was just a junior diplomat, assigned to handle paperwork and translate documents. The real work would be done by Ambassador Cho Taiwan, who sat at the front of the shuttle with his advisors. Taiwan was a careful man who believed in following rules and shaking the right hands. He had prepared for this moment his entire life. Next to Do-hyun sat Park Yuna, the chief engineer of their delegation. She was looking at her tablet, studying the station's design. Her eyes moved fast, taking in every detail. "They have not changed their technology in 3,000 years, she whispered to Do-hyun. "Look at these power systems. They are efficient, but old. Very old." Do-hyun nodded but said nothing. He was too nervous to speak. The shuttle landed with a soft sound. The doors opened, and humanity stepped into the galaxy. The aliens were waiting for them. There were so many different kinds. Some were tall and thin with skin like polished stone. Others were short and covered in soft fur. A few floated in the air using machines attached to their bodies. They all wore symbols of the Galactic Concordat, a circle with 12 points, representing the 12 ruling species. A creature with 6 limbs and eyes like black jewels stepped forward. Its voice came through a translation device, calm and cold. "Welcome, humans. I am High Arbiter Molith. You have traveled far. The Concordat recognizes your achievement. We offer you observer status in our great alliance." Ambassador Taiwan bowed deeply. "We are honored, High Arbiter. Earth is grateful for this opportunity." Do-hyun watched the ceremony with growing unease. Everything was too perfect. The aliens smiled, but their smiles did not reach their eyes. They spoke kind words, but something felt wrong. He could not explain it. It was like walking into a beautiful house and smelling something rotten hidden behind the walls. Over the next few weeks, the human delegation settled into their quarters on the station. They attended meetings. They signed preliminary agreements. They smiled and nodded and followed every rule. Observer status meant they could watch but not participate. They could not vote on Concordat decisions. They could not trade freely. They were allowed to settle in only one small system at the edge of known space. "It is a beginning," Taiwan said during a private meeting. "We must be patient. In a few centuries, we will earn full membership." Centuries. Do-hyun felt the word like a weight on his chest. Centuries of waiting. Centuries of following rules made by others. He started to explore the station on his own. He walked through markets where aliens sold goods from 1,000 worlds. He visited libraries filled with knowledge older than human civilization. And everywhere he went, he noticed something strange. There were servants everywhere. They carried luggage. They cleaned floors. They served food at restaurants. They all looked the same, small creatures with gray skin and large, sad eyes. They moved quickly and quietly, never speaking unless spoken to. The other aliens ignored them completely, as if they were furniture. Do-hyun stopped one of them in a quiet corridor. "Excuse me, what is your name? What species are you?" The creature looked at him with surprise and fear. Its voice was barely a whisper. "We are Velith, sir. Please, do not speak to us. It is not allowed." "Not allowed? Why?" But the Velith hurried away without answering. That night, Do-hyun could not sleep. He accessed the Concordat's public database and searched for information about the Veleth. What he found made his blood run cold. 8,000 years ago, the Veleth had been a proud civilization. They had built great cities. They had created art and music. They had joined the Concordat as equal members. But then they made a mistake. They voted against the Concordat decision. It was a small matter, a trade agreement they thought was unfair. But the Concordat did not accept disagreement. The Veleth were stripped of their membership. Their worlds were taken. Their people were scattered across the galaxy as servants. Their history was erased. For 8,000 years, they had lived as slaves, and no one remembered they had ever been anything else. Do-Yoon read the words again and again. He thought about the small creature in the corridor, the fear in its eyes, the way it had begged him not to speak to it. He searched further. The Veleth were not alone. 17 species had suffered the same fate. 17 civilizations destroyed because they said no to the Concordat. Their crime was disagreement. Their punishment was eternal. Do-Hyun closed his tablet. His hands were shaking. The next morning, he went to Ambassador Taiwan's office. Lee Sujin, the young translator, was there, organizing documents for the upcoming ceremony. In 3 days, Taiwan would sign the Articles of Order, the legal framework that would make Earth an official part of the Concordat. Ambassador, Do-Hyun said, I need to speak with you. It is urgent. Taiwan looked up from his papers. What is it? Do-Hyun told him everything. The Veleth, the 17 species, the hidden history of the Concordat. Taiwan listened without expression. When Do-Hyun finished, the ambassador sighed. I know. Do-Hyun felt the floor shift beneath him. You know? Of course I know. Do you think Earth sent us here without research? We know what the Concordat is. We know what they do to species that disobey. Taiwan stood and walked to the window. Outside, the station glittered with false beauty. But what choice do we have? They are powerful. We are weak. If we refuse their terms, they will crush us. If we accept, at least we survive. Survive as what? Do-Hyun asked. As slaves waiting to happen? Taiwan turned to face him. His eyes were tired, old. As survivors. That is enough. Do-Han wanted to argue. He wanted to shout. But he saw the fear in Taiwan's face, the same fear he had seen in the Veleth servant. The fear of a creature that had already accepted its cage. He left the office without another word. That night, Yuna found him sitting alone in the observation deck, staring at the stars. I heard about your meeting with Taiwan, she said, sitting beside him. Sujin told me. She is worried about you. She should be worried about all of us. Yuna was quiet for a moment. I have been studying their systems, their technology, their communications. She lowered her voice. I can get you access to restricted files. If you want to find more proof. Do-Hyun looked at her. Why would you help me? You know what will happen if we are caught. Yuna smiled, but it was a sad smile. My grandmother used to tell me stories about our country's history, about times when our people were told to bow, to obey, to accept their fate. She looked out at the stars. She said the ones who refused were not always heroes. Sometimes they were just people who could not live with silence. Do-Hyun understood. He understood completely. 3 days remained until the signing ceremony. 3 days to find the truth. 3 days to make a choice that would change everything. He did not know yet that his choice would shake the galaxy. He did not know that billions of beings were about to hear his voice. He only knew one thing. He could not sign away humanity's freedom without a fight. And somewhere in the station, a Veleth servant looked up at the human walking past and felt something she had not felt in centuries. Hope. The grand chamber of the Concordat was the largest room Do-Yoon had ever seen. It could hold 1,000,000 beings. Today, it held exactly that. Representatives from 900 worlds had gathered to witness humanity's formal acceptance into the galactic order. Cameras floated in the air like metal insects, broadcasting the ceremony to every corner of known space. Billions of eyes were watching. Billions of ears were listening. Do-Yoon stood at the back of the human delegation, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. He had not slept in 3 days. He had spent every hour reading the restricted files Yuna had helped him access. What he found was worse than he imagined. The Concordat was not an alliance. It was a prison. The 12 ruling species controlled everything: trade, travel, technology, law. Any species that challenged their authority was destroyed. Not through war. That would be too obvious. They used laws instead. They used fine print and legal tricks and economic pressure. They strangled civilizations slowly, quietly, until nothing remained but servants and silence. 17 species have been absorbed into servitude. But the real number was higher. Do-Yoon found records of 43 civilizations that had simply vanished. Their planets were empty. Their people were gone. No one asked questions. No one remembered their names dotted and buried deepest in the files. He found the most terrible secret of all. The Concordat had been secretly sterilizing troublesome populations for centuries. Entire generations had been prevented from being born. Species that asked too many questions slowly died out without even knowing why. It was genocide through patience. It was murder through time. Do-Yoon had shown the files to Yuna and Sujin. Yuna had cursed in 3 languages. Sujin had cried. Neither of them knew what to do. If we expose this, they will kill us, Yuna said. If we stay silent, we become part of it, Do-Yoon replied. Now he stood in the grand chamber, watching Ambassador Taiwan walk toward the central podium. The articles of order were displayed on a massive screen, page after page of laws and requirements and conditions. At the bottom was a space for Taiwan's signature. One signature, and humanity would belong to the Concordat forever. High Arbiter Molith stood beside the podium, tall and ancient and cold. His 6 limbs were folded in a gesture of patience. His black eyes reflected nothing. Today is a historic moment, Molith announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. The species called humanity has traveled far to join our family. They have proven themselves worthy of our protection. Let us welcome them with open arms. The crowd made sounds of approval. Do-Yoon felt sick. Taewon reached the podium. He looked small against the massive screen behind him. His hands were steady as he picked up the device that would record his signature. Dayan thought of the Velith servant in the corridor. He thought of the empty planets. He thought of children who would never be born because the Concordat decided their parents were troublesome. He thought of his grandmother, who had once told him that some silences were louder than screams. Before he knew what he was doing, Do-Yoon stepped forward. He walked past the other delegates, past the security guards, past the floating cameras. He walked until he stood beside Ambassador Taiwan, close enough to touch him. "What are you doing?" Taiwan whispered, his face white with shock. "Get back to your position." But Do-Yoon did not move. He turned to face the crowd. He looked directly into the nearest camera, and in a voice that was clear and calm, he spoke one word: "No." The chamber fell silent. It was not an ordinary silence. It was the silence of 1,000,000,000 beings holding their breath. It was the silence of a galaxy that had forgotten what refusal sounded like. Molith's eyes fixed on Do-Yoon like lasers. "What did you say?" Do-Yoon's legs were shaking. His voice wanted to break, but he forced himself to speak. "I said no. Humanity will not sign these articles. You have no authority to make this decision. Molluth's voice was cold as space. You are a minor official. Your ambassador stands ready to sign. Do-hyun looked at Taiwan. The ambassador's face was frozen between anger and fear. For a moment, Do-hyun thought Taiwan would have him dragged away. But then Taiwan looked at the articles on the screen. He looked at Molluth. And something changed in his eyes, something small, but real. He put down the signing device. The chamber erupted in noise. Aliens shouted and screamed. Guards moved toward the human delegation. But the cameras kept recording. Billions of beings across the galaxy kept watching. Explain yourself, Molluth demanded, and for the first time, there was something other than cold patience in his voice. There was anger. Do-hyun turned to face him. His hands would not stop shaking, so he pressed them against his sides. I have seen your history, he said. Not the history you teach, but the history you hide. I have seen what happened to the Velith, to the Karth, to the Silken, to 43 civilizations that no longer exist because they disagreed with you. Murmurs spread through the crowd like fire. I have seen your sterilization programs, Do-hyun continued. I have seen how you kill species slowly, quietly, so no one notices. You call this order. You call this peace. But it is not. It is a prison. And you are the jailers. Molluth's limbs tightened. These are lies. Propaganda from a primitive species that does not understand its place in the galaxy. Then prove it, Do-hyun said. Open your archives. Let every species see the truth. If I am lying, the truth will show it. Molluth did not answer. He did not need to. Everyone in the chamber saw his hesitation. Everyone understood what it meant. We do not sign away freedom, Do-hyun said, turning back to the cameras. Not ours. Not anyone's. Humanity came to the stars looking for friends, not masters. If that means we must stand alone, then we will stand alone. But we will stand as free beings. The chamber was in chaos now. Guards were pushing through the crowd. Alien delegates were shouting at each other. But Do-hyun stood still, his eyes fixed on the stars, visible through the chamber's great windows. Yuna appeared at his side, grabbing his arm. We need to go, now. They ran. Sujin joined them at the exit, her face pale but determined. Together, the three of them pushed through the confusion and reached their shuttle. Behind them, the Concordat's order was cracking for the first time in 12,000 years. As the shuttle lifted off, Do-hyun looked back at the station. He expected to feel fear. He expected to feel regret. Instead, he felt something strange and unexpected. He felt free. They reached the human ship within the hour. Captain Big Ji-woo was waiting for them in the command center, her face grim. Do you understand what you have done? She asked Do-hyun. The entire galaxy just watched you tell the Concordat to go to hell. There is no taking that back. I know, Do-hyun said quietly. Earth's government is in emergency session. The Concordat is already threatening blockade. We might be looking at war. I know. Ji-woo studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Good. Someone needed to say it. I'm just glad it was not me. Do-hyun almost laughed. Almost thought later that night, a message reached the ship. It was short and came from an unknown source, but Yuna traced it to a Velith communication network. A network that was not supposed to exist. The message contained only 6 words. Thank you. We remember how to hope. Do-hyun read the message again and again. He thought about the servant in the corridor. He thought about billions of beings who had forgotten they were allowed to say no. He did not know what would come next. He did not know if humanity would survive. But for the first time since arriving at the station, the weight on his chest was gone. He had spoken the truth. And somewhere in the galaxy, someone had listened. That was enough. For now, that was enough. 6 months had passed since Do-hyun spoke the word that broke the silence. 6 months of chaos, fear, and something that felt dangerously like Hope. Earth was under blockade. Concordat ships surrounded the Sol system like a wall of metal and threat. No trade vessels could enter or leave. No communications reached the outside galaxy without being monitored. The message was clear: surrender the human who insulted us, or suffer. Earth refused. Do-hyun had offered to turn himself in 100 times. Each time, the World Council said no. He was no longer just a minor diplomat. He was a symbol. His face was painted on walls in cities across Earth. Children wore shirts with his words printed on them. He had become something larger than himself, something he never asked to be. He spent most of his days in a small office, helping Yuna study Concordat technology. She had captured samples during their escape from the station data chips, communication devices, even fragments of their ship systems. What she discovered amazed her. They stopped innovating 10,000 years ago, she told Do-hyun, her eyes wide with disbelief. Their technology is advanced, yes, but it is frozen. They found what worked and never changed it. They are afraid of change. That is how they control everything, Do-hyun said. If nothing changes, no one can challenge them. Yuna smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. Humans are very good at change. She began to build. She took Concordat designs and improved them. She found weaknesses in their systems and exploited them. Within months, Earth's small fleet of 200 ships was equipped with technology that should have been impossible for such a young species. But ships alone would not save them. They needed all eyes. The first sign of hope came from a small cargo vessel that slipped through the blockade. Inside was a single passenger, a Velith woman named Nari. She was thin and tired, her gray skin marked with scars from years of hard labor. But her eyes burned with a fire that made Do-hyun's heart stop. "I have come to speak with the human who said no," she announced when they brought her to the council chamber. "I have information that your galaxy needs to hear." Nari had been a servant on a Concordat research station. For decades, she had cleaned laboratories and served scientists while pretending to be invisible. But she had also been watching, listening, remembering. "The Concordat thinks we Velith are broken," she said, standing before the World Council. "They think we have forgotten who we were. They are wrong. We remember everything. We remember everything. We have been waiting for someone to remind the galaxy that resistance is possible." She presented her evidence. Data files stolen over years, records of sterilization programs, communications between Concordat leaders discussing how to manage troublesome populations, names of species that have been quietly eliminated, evidence of atrocities spanning millennia. The council watched in horror. When Nari finished, the room was silent. "Why did your people never fight back?" someone asked. Nari's face was calm, but her hands were shaking. "Because fighting alone means dying alone. We needed to know we would not be alone." She looked at Do-hyun. "When you spoke, we knew. We finally knew." Sujin was given the task of broadcasting Nari's testimony. She worked day and night, encoding the message in ways that could slip past Concordat monitoring systems. She sent it through hidden channels, through networks the Concordat did not know existed. She sent it everywhere. The response came faster than anyone expected. Within weeks, 3 species declared independence from the Concordat. The Korath, a reptilian people who had been absorbed 5,000 years ago, rose up on their homeworld and expelled their Concordat overseers. The Silken, insect-like beings known for their beautiful textiles, stopped producing goods for their masters and barricaded themselves in their factories. A species called the Hollow So beaten down, that no one remembered their original name, began to speak again for the first time in generations. The galaxy was waking up, but the Concordat did not. Sleep.High Arbiter Molluth appeared on every screen across known space. His voice was as cold as ever, but there was something new beneath the ice. Fear, perhaps. Or rage. The species called humanity has chosen chaos over order, he announced. They have spread lies and encouraged rebellion. They have threatened the peace we have maintained for 40,000 years. This cannot be tolerated. He paused, his black eyes staring into the camera as if he could see every being watching. The Concordat fleet will restore order to the Sol system. The humans will be given one final chance to surrender. If they refuse, they will face the consequences of their arrogance. The broadcast ended. Silence fell across Earth. Admiral Beak Ji-woo called an emergency meeting of military commanders. Do-hyun was there, though he did not know why. He was no soldier. Our scouts report a fleet of 10,000 ships mobilizing near the Concordat core worlds, Ji-woo said, her voice steady despite the impossible numbers. They will reach Seoul in approximately 3 weeks. 10,000 ships, someone whispered. We have 200. 212, Yuna corrected. I finished the upgrades on 12 more yesterday. No one laughed. We cannot win a direct battle, Ji-woo continued. But we do not need to win. We need to survive long enough for the rebellion to spread. Every day we hold on, more species will join us. Every day we exist, we prove the Concordat can be challenged. And if we fall? A commander asked. Ji-woo's eyes were hard. Then we fall fighting. And the galaxy will remember how we fell. That night, Do-hyun stood on the roof of the command building, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, 10,000 ships were coming to destroy his world. Somewhere out there, billions of beings were watching to see if humanity would survive. Nari found him there, wrapped in a blanket against the cold. You are thinking about death, she said. It was not a question. I am thinking about what happens if we lose, Do-hyun admitted. Everything we started, everything your people have been waiting for, it could all end in 3 weeks. Nari stood beside him, looking at the same stars. 8,000 years ago, my ancestors voted no. They were crushed. Their children were made slaves. Their grandchildren forgot they had ever been free. She paused. But they never stopped dreaming. Never stopped hoping. Even when hope seemed impossible. How? Do-hyun asked. How do you keep hoping when everything is against you? Nari smiled, and for a moment, she looked almost peaceful. Because hope is not about winning. Hope is about believing that trying matters. Even if we lose, we tried. Even if we fall, we stood. That is what hope means. Don thought about her words for a long time. He thought about the Velith who had waited 8,000 years for someone to say no. He thought about the species rising up across the galaxy, facing impossible odds because one human had refused to stay silent. He had never wanted to be a hero. He still did not think of himself as one. But maybe that was not the point. Maybe the point was simply to stand up when standing up mattered. 3 weeks until the fleet arrived. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks to prove that freedom was worth fighting for. Do-hyun looked at the stars one last time. Then he went back inside to help Dot. There was work to do. The Concordat fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system on a cold Tuesday morning. 10,217 ships, according to Earth's sensors. They filled the darkness of space like a metal ocean, each vessel bristling with weapons that had destroyed civilizations. Admiral Big Ji-woo stood in the command center of Earth's flagship, the Resolution. Around her, officers worked at their stations, their faces pale but determined. On the main screen, the enemy fleet was displayed as a sea of red dots. 212 ships against 10,000, her second-in-command said quietly. The numbers are not in our favor. Numbers are never in our favor, Ji-woo replied. That has never stopped us before. Do-hyun was on the resolution as well, though he had argued against it. Ji-woo had insisted. "The soldiers need to see you," she had said. "They need to know what they are fighting for." Now he stood near the back of the command center, feeling useless. He was no soldier. He could not fire weapons or fly ships. All he could do was watch and hope. The first Concordat message came within an hour of their arrival. High Arbiter Mollith's face appeared on every screen. "Humans," he said, his voice carrying the weight of 40,000 years of authority. "This is your final chance. Surrender the one called Kim Do-hyun. Pledge your obedience to the Concordat. Accept your place in our order. Do this, and you will be spared." Ji-woo looked at Do-hyun. "Your call," she said. Do-hyun thought of Nari. He thought of the Velith waiting across the galaxy. He thought of his grandmother, who had taught him that some things were worth more than survival. "Tell them no," he said. Ji-woo smiled, and it was the first real smile Do-hyun had seen on her face. She opened the channel to the Concordat fleet. "This is Admiral Baek Ji-woo of the Earth Defense Force. We have received your offer. Our answer is the same answer we gave 6 months ago. The same answer we will give forever. No." She closed the channel. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the Concordat fleet began to advance. The first hour of the battle was the worst. Concordat ships moved with perfect coordination, their weapons cutting through Earth's defenses like knives through paper. The human fleet scattered, trying to use their smaller size and greater speed to avoid the worst of the assault. It was not enough that 12 human ships were destroyed in the first 10 minutes. Then 20. Then 40. Do-hyun watched the casualty reports scroll across the screens, each number representing hundreds of lives lost. He wanted to look away. He forced himself to keep watching. This was his doing. He had started this. He owed it to them to witness it. But then something changed. A new ship appeared at the edge of the sensor grid. Then another. Then a dozen. Then 100. "Admiral!" a sensor officer shouted. "We have incoming vessels. They are not Concordat. Repeat, they are not Concordat." Ji-woo leaned forward. "Identify them." The officer's voice shook with disbelief. "Velith transports. Korath warships. Silken carriers." "Admiral, there must be 500 ships incoming." "No, 1,000. The count keeps rising." Do-hyun's heart stopped. He walked to the main screen, staring at the flood of new contacts appearing in green among the sea of red dot they had come. Against all logic, against all probability, they had come. A voice crackled over the communication channel. It was rough and unfamiliar, speaking in the universal language of the Concordat with an accent that had not been heard in 5,000 years. "This is Fleet Commander Goral of the Korath Liberation Force. We heard a human said no to the Concordat. We decided we would like to say no as well. Where do you need us?" Behind the Korath came the Velith, flying ships they have built in secret over centuries. Behind them came the Silken, their carriers filled with fighters designed by species who had been told they were too stupid to innovate. Behind them came the Hollow, the Nameless, the Forgotten, every species that had ever been crushed by the Concordat. Rising together for the first time in history, the battle changed in an instant. The Concordat fleet, expecting to crush 200 human ships, suddenly found itself facing nearly 3,000 vessels from a dozen species. Confusion spread through their ranks. Ships that had never failed to coordinate began to break formation. Yuna's voice came over the command channel from her engineering station. "Admiral, I have an idea. Our modified FTL drives, if we overload them near enemy ships, they will create a spatial disruption. It might be enough to take out their command vessel." "Might?" Ji-woo asked. 60% chance of success. 40% chance of a very large explosion. I like those odds. Do it. 3 human ships volunteered for the mission. They were small, fast, crewed by people who knew they would not survive. Do-hyun learned their names later and never forgot them. Lieutenant Park Min-ho, Ensign Kim Ye-jin, Captain Ro Seung-woo. They flew straight at the Concordat flagship, weaving through weapons fire. Never slowing down. The explosion lit up the darkness of space like a new sun. When the light faded, the Concordat flagship was gone. Molluth's ship, the symbol of Concordat authority for 10,000 years, had been reduced to floating debris. The enemy fleet fell into chaos. Do-hyun did not hesitate. He grabbed a communication device and opened a channel not to the human forces, not to the Allies, but to the Concordat soldiers themselves. "This is Kim Do-hyun," he said, his voice carrying across thousands of ships. "I am the human who said no. I know you were told we are the enemy. I know you were told we want to destroy you. That is a lie." He paused, gathering his thoughts. The battle continued around him, but for a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. We do not want to destroy anyone. We want what every being wants, the right to choose our own path. The right to say yes when we believe something is right, and no when we believe it is wrong. You have that same right. You have always had it. The Concordat made you forget. His voice grew stronger. You do not have to do this. You do not have to die for masters who see you as tools. You can choose differently. We did. And look, we are still here. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, Concordat ships began to power down their weapons. First 10, then 50, then hundreds. Entire squadrons withdrew from the battle. Crews who had served the Concordat their entire lives decided, in that moment, that they were tired. Not all of them surrendered. The battle continued for 6 more hours. Many more lives were lost on both sides. But when the last shots were fired, the Concordat fleet had been reduced to less than half its original size. And what remained was retreating toward the edge of the system. Admiral Ji-woo slumped in her chair, exhaustion written across her face. "We won," she said, as if she did not quite believe it. "For now," Do-hyun replied. "There will be more battles. Yes, but not today." She looked at him, and there was something like respect in her eyes. "That speech you gave, it probably saved more lives than all our weapons combined." Do-hyun shook his head. "The people who fought saved lives. I just reminded them why they were fighting." Later, a message reached the Resolution. It was from the retreating Concordat fleet, not from any commander, but from the crew of a small support vessel. It said, "We are going home, but we will remember what you said. Thank you." Do-hyun read the message and felt something loosen in his chest. They had survived. Against impossible odds, they had survived. But as he looked out at the stars, still glittering with the fires of battle, he knew this was only the beginning. The Concordat was wounded, but not destroyed. The galaxy was changing. A change was never easy. There would be more battles, more sacrifices, more long nights wondering if they had made the right choice. But for now, for this one moment, they had proven something important. The galaxy could change. All it took was one word, no. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Seoul. Do-hyun stood in a garden on the outskirts of Seoul, watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, colors that reminded him of the fires that had lit up space during the battle. But there were no fires today. Today there was only peace. Fragile and precious and new. The galaxy had changed beyond recognition. The Concordat had collapsed within 3 months of the battle. 4 of the 12 ruling species had withdrawn their support immediately after the defeat. The others followed one by one as rebellion spread across their territories. 40,000 years of iron control had ended not with a final battle, but with a slow crumbling, like a building whose foundations had rotted away. What replaced it was chaos. Beautiful, terrible, necessary chaos. Some planets descended into conflict. Species that had been held together by concordat force now fought over old grievances and new territories. Wars broke out on a dozen worlds. The galaxy, so long frozen in false peace, was now wild and unpredictable. But other worlds flourished. The Velith, free for the first time in 8,000 years, had returned to their homeworld and begun rebuilding their civilization. Nari had become their first elected leader, chosen by people who had never been allowed to vote before. When Do-Hyun saw the broadcasts of her inauguration, he had cried. The Karath had established a coalition of freed species, working together to defend their independence. The Silken had opened their markets to free trade, their beautiful textiles now reaching worlds that had never seen them. Even the Hollow, who had finally chosen a new name, the Awakened, were learning to speak again, their long silence finally broken. And humanity? Humanity had become something unexpected. Not conquerors, not rulers, just a young species that had reminded the galaxy what courage looked like. Admiral Jiwoo had worked with leaders from a dozen worlds to establish a new alliance. It was called the Free Compact, and it was nothing like the Concordat. There were no permanent rulers, no forced obedience, just agreements between equals, negotiated openly and honestly. It was messy and slow and frustrating. It was also real. Yuna had been offered positions on 100 worlds, each eager for her engineering genius. She had refused them all. "I am not done with Earth yet," she said. "Besides, someone needs to keep building things. The galaxy has a lot of catching up to do." Sujin had become a historian, documenting everything that had happened. She traveled from world to world, recording stories of the rebellion, making sure that the truth would never be erased again. "History matters," she told Do-Hyun once. "If we forget what happened, we are doomed to repeat it." And Do-Hyun? Do-Hyun had been offered every title imaginable. President of Earth, Chairman of the Free Compact, High Representative of the Liberated Species. He had refused them all. "I said no once," he told anyone who asked. "That does not make me qualified to tell anyone yes." Now he spent his days in quiet ways. He taught classes at a university, sharing what he had learned about alien cultures and galactic politics. He visited schools, telling children the truth about what had happened and why it mattered. Sometimes he just sat in gardens and watched the sunset, grateful for the simple beauty of a world at peace. Footsteps approached on the garden path. Do-Hyun did not need to turn around to know who it was. Yuna had a way of walking that sounded like someone always in a hurry, even when she was not. "I thought I would find you here," she said, sitting beside him on the bench. "Still watching sunsets?" "They are free," Do-Hyun replied. "And beautiful. Two things I will never take for granted." Yuna smiled. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors change across the sky. "Do you regret it?" she asked finally. "Any of it?" Do-Hyun thought about the question carefully. He thought about the ships that had burned in the battle, the soldiers who had died, the chaos that had spread across the galaxy, the families torn apart by new conflicts, the uncertainty that still clouded the future. "Every day," he admitted. "Every day. I wonder if I made things worse. If the chaos we started has hurt more than the order we broke." And? He looked at her, and his eyes were tired but clear. "And then I remember what that order really was. I remember the Velith serving in silence. I remember the species that disappeared without anyone noticing. I remember the children who were never born because someone decided their parents were troublesome." He turned back to the sunset. Order can be a cage. Silence can be a prison. At least chaos gives people the chance to choose. At least chaos is honest about what it is. Yuna nodded slowly. Nari sent a message this morning. She wanted me to thank you. Again. She thanks me too much. Her people were slaves for 8,000 years. I think she is allowed to be grateful. Yuna paused. She also said something interesting. She said that on her world, they have started telling stories about you. Not as a hero. As something else. What? A teacher. Someone who reminded them what they had forgotten. Yuna smiled. She said the children call you the one who remembered. Do-hyun felt something warm spread through his chest. Not pride. Something deeper. Something like hope? I did not remember anything, he said quietly. I just said what I felt. Sometimes that is all it takes. They sat together as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. The first stars began to appear, tiny points of light in the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, billions of beings were watching those same stars, making their own choices about their own futures. It was messy. It was uncertain. It was often frightening, but it was free. Do-hyun thought about the young diplomat he had been, standing in that grand chamber with his heart pounding and his hands shaking. He had never meant to change the galaxy. He had just been unable to live with silence. Maybe that was the secret. Maybe heroes were not people who wanted to be heroes. Maybe they were just people who could not stay quiet when staying quiet was wrong. He looked up at the stars, countless worlds now choosing their own paths. 40,000 years of peace, he said quietly. That is what they called it. 40,000 years of obedience disguised as peace. And now? Yuna asked. Do-hyun smiled. It was a tired smile, worn by a year of struggle and doubt. But it was real. Now we have something better. Now we have a chance. Chaos, yes. Conflict, yes. But also hope. Also choice. Also the freedom to fail and try again. He paused, thinking of all the species now building new futures across the galaxy. The Concordat gave the galaxy order. We gave it something more important. What? The right to say no. Yuna laughed, and it was a good sound, warm and human and alive. They stayed in the garden until the stars filled the sky. Somewhere out there, new alliances were being formed. New conflicts were being resolved. New children were being born into worlds that had forgotten what freedom meant. The galaxy was changing. It would never stop changing. And that was exactly as it should be. Do-hyun watched the stars and felt, for the first time in a long time, something that felt like peace. Not the false peace of the Concordat, the silence of people too afraid to speak. Real peace. The peace of someone who had done what he believed was right and lived to see the results. Freedom was messy. Freedom was frightening. Freedom was worth it. And the stars had never looked so bright.